for the invocations. How that works. Morning. I'd like to call the September 11th Kankakee County Full Board meeting to order. Today's invocation is from Jim Byrne.
As the bow our heads, we have a moment of silence in remembrance of the tragic events 17 years ago. Remember all the victims, all the first responders, and all the first responders and people that defend our way of life to this day. 7 moments of silence. Thank you.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If I could get a roll call, please.
Mr. Tripp.
Present.
Mr. Washington.
Present.
Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess. Mr. Tholen. Mrs. Polk. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Lear. Mr. Hildebrand. Mrs. Weber. Mr. Reinfeldt. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Zenz. Mr. Wheeler.
Present.
We have a quorum.
We have a quorum. No communications. Under public commentary, I have a few here. Remember, it's 15 minutes in total length, so we have quite a few today, if brevity would be appropriate. Mike Damps, looks like from Bonfield, on that microphone back there. Thank you.
Good. Mike Damps from Bonfield. I was actually originally coming here today to voice my opposition to Zoning Board Case 1826. However, after getting a no vote in the ZBA and a no vote at the Planning and Zoning Committee, they withdrew their permit, probably only to bring it back again at a later time. That's what brought me here still. I don't understand why is the county not strengthen their solar farm ordinance with as many as we've gotten to put residential setbacks on these similar to a windmill. I mean, some counties have 2,200 feet on a wind farm. Give us 500 or 1,000 feet on a residential setback instead of making these, your residents that live here, pay taxes, work here, have been here their whole lives, go up against these multi-million or billion-dollar companies on our own when they've got years of a head start against us. If you guys would just do something to protect the residents, it would save so much hassle and stress on everybody that is going up against all these solar farms, especially with so many of them coming. Today you've got several again. And not only the residential setbacks, I mean, a standard landscaping plan with specific, 10 foot apart, has to be 10 foot wide, 10 foot tall at maturity. Right now, it's just a landscape plan that's pretty vague in most instances and is specific, or individual to every one. There is no specific one that every solar farm has to go up against. So I urge the board to start looking into, with as many as we're getting, start protecting the residents, help us out a little bit, and give us some setbacks, some guidelines that these people have to follow instead of it being a case-by-case basis where we've got to fight our hearts out just to stick up for our property. Thank you.
I have Wanda Warman from Nana's Cakery in Bradley.
Thank you. I am here in opposition to that new cupcake law. I feel there's laws out there to protect the public, and now they're making adjustments to them and making new laws, basically. I started my business. I stuck my neck out. I did everything that was right. I got my license. We get inspected every year. All my girls have their permit or their license to work with. It's just, and I understand they only can bring $1,000. There is times when I don't even make $1,000 in a month, and I would love to close the doors those months, and not even, but I still have the rent, I still have the utilities, I still have to do it. And I think it should, and I know competition is good, but if we're all on the same same playing field, it's fair. It isn't fair that we pay all of this stuff and abide by the rules, get inspected every month, and watch everything that we do. I just feel that this new law is going to open doors to other things. I mean, so somebody wants to start a gun business, but they don't have the money to get out there and do it. So can they do it at home, you know, until they have the funds available? When I started, I had nothing. I had been collecting for years, equipment and stuff to do it. Found a small place, started out, and grew the business. A lot of time, a lot of hours. I lived there. I still live there. Now I'd like to sell, but who's going to buy when you can just do it at home and not have to pay the rent and pay everything? So that is my concern, that, you know, I have worked hard to make this happen, and I understand how others want to get started, but we're doing the best we can at our shop. Thank you.
Next is Alex Quezada from Kankakee.
Good morning, Alex Quesada from 1851 Meadowview Avenue, Kankakee. I've been a resident for over 17 years, and I am the father of 3 children, one of them working at the Good Shepherd Manor, 2 more in Bishop McNamara. And I'm here today to say no to the for-profit jail, as I see this as a snowball effect that will affect us all, because for-profit jails are not to restore human beings to society. They're here to make money, and the most people they have in, more money they will make it. Right now they're using the immigrant community to make this profit, but when they're done taking all the undocumented people, they're gonna be after your children, your grandchildren, to make more money. So I am working very hard to make my family a happy and productive members of society. So I'm with Connect Group that it's saying no to for-profit jail in Kankakee as immoral to the only reason that separates families. Aren't you guys working to keep families together and make productive community? Then I'm asking you, please say no to the for-profit jails. I hope that you are not feeding your families from this money that they make separating families. Thank you.
Jim, is it Dugan or Duggan from Mantino?
Hi, my name is Jim Duggan, and I've been a resident of Kankakee County since 2004. 5 generations ago, back in 1856, my direct descendant James Duggan arrived at Ellis Highland in the shadows of the Statue of Liberty with his brother Edward. They were, by all accounts, refugees. The Irish potato famine had recently ended. During this famine, 1.5 million men, women, and children traveled from Ireland to the United States out of desperation. I am grateful that our ancestors were not imprisoned. Quite the opposite. James and Edward were given opportunity. They served in the Wisconsin Regiment in the Civil War. James's son, James Arthur, became a landowner and a successful farmer in Platteville, Wisconsin. Had my ancestors been imprisoned, it is highly probable that I am not here. The same could be said for my 10 brothers and sisters. Now we jump to the present. Men, women, and children are coming to our borders out of desperation. They are escaping violence, intense poverty, starvation, political intimidation. However, our response today is not to provide a welcoming hand and economic opportunity. Instead, we relabel the refugees as criminals and incarcerate them. In the case of our county, we do this to balance our budget. We say they broke the law. I wonder if we are imprisoning refugees, who is breaking the law? I wonder, board members, how bad your lives would have to be to knowingly walk into a desert with temperatures over 100 degrees with only the clothes on your back and a small amount of water. Also knowing that your journey will take weeks and could possibly end in your death. The destination is a land using a language you do not know with leaders that are openly hostile to you. How bad would it be to need to get for you to make that decision? That is a decision being made by those seeking refuge at our border. Our response? Separate the children from their parents and incarcerate them. Again, I ask, who are the lawbreakers? Who are the criminals? This past spring, I attended a conference promoted and organized by the County Health Department and hosted at Olivet Nazarene University. The topic was the impact of trauma on the brain, as well as the long-term health implications of repeated traumatic events. The purpose was to help educators, mental health providers, and local leaders understand the impacts of trauma and to develop a network to support those impacted by trauma. Sadly and ironically, at the same time, our county was and remains the perpetrators of trauma, enabling the tearing apart of families and the separation of children from their parents. We tear apart families that have lived here for generations and then ask our schools and county agencies to pick up the pieces. I wonder if the county strategic plan includes goals that both mitigate the impact of trauma and to traumatize. They say when something does not make sense, it usually has to do with money. I wonder, board members, how many of you have gone over to Jerome Combs Correctional Center to meet the refugees that you are detaining? Tonight there will be 150 or more in your care. How many of you have gone to ask them their stories? How many of you have asked them why they came here, why they left behind, what they left behind to seek a better life? How many of you have gone over to ask them if they are leaving any family members behind? Do you wonder if they are leaving traumatized children in our schools? I wonder if you have spoken with the religious leaders who go over every week to comfort the soon-to-be deported refugees. Our local religious leaders go to assure them that not all Americans are this cruel. They pray with them and listen to their stories. They also give them guidance in how to navigate countries that some of them have never lived in, and they sometimes do not speak the language. I wonder how you sleep with the knowledge of your role in so much suffering and loss. An immigrant can be defined as someone who chooses to leave their country. A refugee is someone who is forced to leave their country. I ask you to think about the family risking their lives on the perilous march through the desert. Do you think this is done by choice or necessity? I wonder if you think someone can be both a refugee and a criminal. I wonder if you're aware of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and the declaration passed in 1951. The declaration is clear that no nation shall return a refugee against his or her will, and that refugees shall not be penalized for entering a country illegally. Again, I ask, who are the lawbreakers? Who are the criminals? Members of the county board, I think there will come a day that you will decide that you can no longer stomach this great injustice. There will come a day that you will no longer be able to rationalize this act of cruelty. There will come a day that you will decide that no amount of money is worth the harm you are causing on a daily basis. I hope for the sake of those that do not have a voice that this day comes soon. Thank you.
Chris Shimkus. I believe Bourbonnais. I believe Sweet Street, probably. From Sweet Street.
Good morning, I'm Christine with Sweet Street. In business for 25 years, and I am actually here along with my partners to oppose this cupcake law. As I've said, we've been in business for 25 years. We had to go through the channels that any business that's going to be using food or selling food has to go through. We went through the sanitation classes. We do get inspected by the health department yearly. We also vend at some of the local fests, and we are even inspected there as well. And we wonder, from a sanitation standpoint, where these people who are going to be working with food out of their homes, how are they inspected? Are they inspected? From a sanitation standpoint, we have an issue with this. We really do. We have a 3-compartment sink we have to abide by for washing, rinsing, sanitizing. Do they have to do the same thing? If there are pets in the home, that's an issue. Sick children, another issue. If they start doing cupcakes, is it muffins, pies, chocolate-covered strawberries, caramel corn, cheese corn, all the things that we do in our store that we have to be inspected for? where does this go? How do they inspect these homes? And from a tax incentive for the community, where do you guys collect all your tax money, your revenue? Another thing that seems to be an issue with many of our customers are the food allergies. We have to post on everything that we sell the ingredients that we use in making some of our products. When people are buying things from a home-based business, do they have to abide by the same laws, by the same rules? There are many people who have been coming into the store with these food allergies, not only for the adults, but for the children also. So from a health standpoint, we are looking out for the community in this respect. So, thank you.
Finally, I have Brooke Love from Bradley.
Good morning. My name is Brooke Love. I'm from Bradley. I am actually here in support of the Cupcake Law, the Home Kitchen Act. I have been the person who kind of brought it to the board's attention. I've been here in the Bradley for about almost 5 years now. I myself have been a pastry chef for about 18 years. I have a sanitation license. I've worked for bakeries up north, small bakeries, mom and pop shops, all the way up to wholesale. I've done all the way around. The Home Kitchen Act was actually a law passed in 2014, which allowed this to happen. The only thing the counties have to do, they have to accept it, but it doesn't start there. Then each municipality has to accept it. Once the municipality accepts it, then it's into the region that the person lives, if that affects your home. It allows you to do $1,000 of sales per month. Everything does have to be labeled if it is home baked. If it does have any sort of gluten or allergies, it has to abide by all sort of United States food regulatory labeling standards. When someone goes to do this kind of small business, you're not selling things straight out of your door. This is more of a custom order. If there's any sort of an allergen or anything like that, most people, when placing the order with you, are going to let you know anything that happens. Not to mention that it's your responsibility to mark it as labeled. Many, after counties have passed it and municipalities have gone to pass it, municipalities have put in that you do register with the state of Illinois so that any balances and checks and all of the state taxes can be accounted for. Many do require that you take the food handler's course to make sure that you are following the proper guidelines for serving people and taking all proper measurements. If this does pass, this is one step closer to allowing me, myself, to have a business like Wanda or Sweet Street or Tuwis in Mantino. This is just a step forward. Even as Wanda mentioned, right now she might not make $1,000 a month. This is, the Home Kitchen Act is capped at $1,000 a month. That's it. That's all it is. The same thing that you would be allowing to be made out of the home is the same thing that I would be able, that I can currently sell at farmers markets from product that's made in my home. I can take those same products. I can donate them. I can donate them to the church. I can donate them to the Humane Society. I can donate them to Relay for Walk, which Relay a Life for the walk right here at Bishop Mack. I've done all of those. I do all of that. All of stuff made out of my home. It's marked as so. People know it's done so. But when it comes to the fact that those people want to then come to me and ask, hey, I had your cupcake. Can I order a cake? I can't do that. I am not allowed to do that. I am asking for the county board to allow this first step, to let the communities decide, to let the consumers decide who they want to buy a cake from. I grew up on cakes made from the lady down the street. That's just the way it's been. And unfortunately, we can't do that right now. And I am asking the board to allow each community to decide for themselves if they would like to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on. You know, I did see it, John. I apologize. Yeah, no, you're right. I did see it. I must have grabbed two at the same time. John Beavis from the Health Department.
I'm here also to speak against the passing of this ordinance. Brooke did a good job, and I know a number of the other ones who have spoken already have said a number of things already that are kind of in my notes, so I'll try to cut some of this out. The Home Kitchen Act simply allows Illinois counties and some municipalities to now pass an ordinance which would allow the creation of limited home kitchen businesses. That doesn't mean you have to pass this ordinance. There's only 8 counties out of 102 so far since 2014 that have passed it. I've not talked to any environmental health directors or administrators yet who are in support of this for a number of reasons. The 3 main ones are the fact that food safety training is not required, the disease potential that exists because there's no inspections or registrations that are going to then be required. The only way the health department can get its foot in the door for one of these types of home businesses is on a complaint or a foodborne outbreak. And again, as I said last month, I contend that that's too late to be doing this. It's one of those things that I consider an unfunded mandate by Illinois. I feel if they wanted to have passed this for everybody, they would have. But they created it in such a way that it makes you responsible for passing the ordinance or the municipality for being responsible for passing it. If it passes in Kankakee today, then anyone who lives in the unincorporated areas can start cooking, but people like Brooke or the other individuals are going to have to go to their cities and then try to get them to pass it too. And they may get it or they may not get it. So it's not as simple as they can just do it. The other thing is in regards to the cottage food rule that already does exist. That is a law that Illinois passed. It allows people to make baked goods at home already today. It's a law, but they can only sell them at farmers markets. But it also requires registration, which this rule would not, and it also requires the education, which this rule would not. Food safety is very complicated. People cannot see, taste, or smell food contaminants. There's no way to know the food is safe unless you are aware and know safe handling practices. I don't doubt Brooke's qualifications, but I am concerned about a number of other individuals that might decide they want to try to do this. And since we can't inspect them or get in their door, I have no way of knowing what they might, what their practices are, how they prepared the food, how they cooked the food, how they cooked, cooled, stored, or cleaned up, or if they had any of the conditions that we look at when we go into these restaurants and educate and inspect, and if there are issues, they correct those things. I won't be able to do that. The health department will not be able to do that with any of you if you were all baking out of your home right now. Diseases can spread from one person to another. They can be passed from cookies, cakes, pies. They can be passed through anything. Last month, Mr. Byrne asked me if I was aware of any outbreaks that had occurred as a result of baked goods in my career here at the health department. I answered no. I can still say that that answer is no. However, I am now remembering 2 incidents where we had an outbreak. One of them was, and I can say the name now because the facility is closed, at Bradley Gardens. There was an outbreak of salmonella. There were 140 people who were sick, 70 confirmed salmonella cases, and through that investigation, we found a dessert table that was on the inside. As you came in, the clients would bring in food and sit it down for the workers, for the patrons. They shared it. There's a lot of, it was a mom and pop kind of facility. They were never able to determine what caused the outbreak. Half of the staff had salmonella and 70 people got salmonella from eating the food. I can't say that they didn't get it from the food, but I can't say they did either. But the possibility was it was there, it was present. At a veterans home here a few years ago, we had a number of wings, and one of the wings had an outbreak of norovirus. Again, we found a table where desserts were being brought in by the families and shared with the workers and the staff. So it's possible that that could have caused that outbreak. I can't prove it, but I am aware. And thirdly, then, I just had a conversation with an acquaintance who they went to a wedding and stayed at a bed and breakfast. And when they got there, the house was rented out to a number of individuals and they shared the kitchen. They went down through the kitchen to leave to go to their event, and there was a plate of chocolate chip cookies. This is a true story. I am not making this up. One of my friends ate 2 of them, and then he got sick. When they got back, they found out that those cookies were laced with medical marijuana ingredients. So somebody had made the pot cookies and left them by mistake, or just left them out there because they didn't think anyone else would be there, and he ate them and got sick. That's the kind of thing that we would not have any control over. If I go into Nana's or Sweet Street and I encounter those kind of things, we can address those things right there and take care of it. Later, you're also going to be voting on changing the definition of a hotel. I think, if I understand correctly, that was because people are renting out their rooms because maybe they're too small to be a big hotel yet, and so they want to give it a try. Well, if you're going to incorporate that so that they can become possibly on the tax rolls and be registered as a bed and breakfast, how is this any different? We've got facilities that we inspect and educate, and then we'll have facilities that I'll have no control over inspecting or educating. Currently, the health department licenses and inspects over 625 food establishments. That includes restaurants, retail, gas stations, hospitals, cafeterias, schools, churches, and the temporary foods on the weekends. There are already rules in place that would allow people like Brooke or other bakeries to do what they want to do, to try. Getting in this business is risky. I understand that, but it's riskier for the businesses that are already in place, that if you allow these people to come into competition with them, that then I am not able to go in and inspect, and that they are able to not necessarily register what they're paying in taxes or anything. I think that's a big disservice. So as a result of those reasons, I'm urging you to please vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, sorry for the oversight, John. That was unintentional. All right, moving on. Under certificates of appreciation, Douglas Barwigan, 25 years at the Sheriff's Department. Not here today. And Todd Hunley, 25 years at the Sheriff's Department. He is here. Do something up over here. Sheriff? Sorry. He's Snapchatting. I'm sorry about that.
All right, good morning. It's my privilege to honor both Doug Barwigan and Todd Huntley. I'll say a few words about Todd since he's here. We won't say anything about Doug because he's not here. But no, Doug is a great employee, 25-year employee as well. Does a great job for us. Is a sergeant on the afternoon shift, and the afternoon shift for us is probably our busiest shift, and he handles it flawlessly for the most part, as we all do in law enforcement for the most part. Corporal Huntley has been, again, 25 years. It's a long time. He started, he's only 27, so I don't know how he got to 25 already, but he looks like he's 27. Todd has been involved in a number of units with our department. He was an investigator for 9 years, involved in a number of our serious homicides, a number of our serious cases that he helped solve. Does great work as an investigator, and then he went ahead and got promoted, so he's back on the road. So he is no longer in investigations, but he's a corporal on our day shift and does an outstanding job for us. He's been involved in SWAT and major crimes and is just an asset to our department. We're glad we have him. So Todd, congratulations.
And thank you both for your service. Moving on, minutes of the last meeting, August 14th. Can I get a motion to approve? Mr. Olthoff, second. Mr. Byrne, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Claims Committee reports.
Mr. Chairman and members of the County Board, your Committee on County Claims would beg leave to report they've examined the following claims presented and recommend payment. The clerk is hereby authorized and directed to issue orders to the several claimants payable out of the funds as follows. Highway Fund, $266,336.71. All other funds, $1,095,613.54. Total for the month of July 2018, $1,361,950.25. The General Fund, $4,328,105.03. All other funds, $7,198,267.19. Total for the month of July 2018, $11,526,372.22.
I need a motion to approve the claims. Mr. Washington, second, Ms. Dunbar. Just want to make sure everybody recognizes there wasn't a negative in front of those numbers for the first time in years. I just want to mention that. That's a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington. Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess. Mrs. Polk. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Hildebrand. Mrs. Weber. Mr. Reinfeldt. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Zenz. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Under department reports, can I get a motion to combine and accept the reports as presented? Mr. Mulcahy, second. Mrs. Evans, could I get those read into the record, please?
Absolutely. County Collector's Monthly Report for July 2018. Total cash and investments, $22,814,977.03. County Treasurer's Monthly Report for July 2018. Total cash and bank and investments, $22,814,977.03. Kankakee County Coroner's Monthly Report for July 2018. 91 total calls, 24 coroner's cases, 10 autopsies, 10 toxicology, 2 outside autopsies, 58 cremations, 1 incomplete. Total fees of $4,536. Circuit Clerk's Cash Book for total disbursed for July 2018, $374,523.03. Recorder's Monthly Report for July 2018, disbursement fees paid to the County Treasurer, $135,066.44. County Clerk's Monthly Report for July 2018, total fees, $23,477.85. Kankakee County Monthly Building Division Report for June 2018, total permits, 81, fees of $15,521, total extra fees of $5,138 for a grand total of $20,659. The monthly resolution list for September 2018, total of the county, $3,011.80.
All right, thank you. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Under the consent agenda, just as a reminder, the things that were voted down as far as solar farms, they're in the consent agenda as a rejection. So if you vote aye, it means you are sticking with what ZBA said. I just wanted to make that clear because I had some questions before the meeting. So if there was a PZA, ZBA vote that said no, the affirmative is to continue with that no vote. That makes sense? Okay. So is there any, is there any that need to come off of there besides that? Anything removed from consent? Ms. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 163, I just have a question about it.
Okay, we'll pull it off.
Thank you.
Where's that here? 160. Definition of hotel. Ordinance amending the definition of hotel. Alrighty. Any others? Mr. Byrne?
I need to abstain from number 164.
So you don't want yourself to be on the help?
Well, I don't vote one way or the other. I take my name.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's noted. Just
Yes,
from that one item on the
yeah.
consent.
Well,
All right.
I'm looking forward
Any
to my
others
next.
that need to come off?
We're removing him before he's put on.
Exactly, yeah. Alrighty then, I guess I need a motion to combine and approve the consent agenda. Mr. Seroy, second. Mr. Vickery. If we could get those read into the record, please.
Certainly. Authorizing the county board chairman to sign an intergovernmental agreement with the village of Bourbonnais. Resolution restricting parking on St. George Road from 1,300 feet east of Route US 45, going easterly 2,274 feet in the village of Bourbonnais. Resolution ordinance for an extension of an altered speed zone on County Highway 8, 5000 North Road, east of US Routes 45 and 52 in Bourbonnais Township. ZBA case 18-28, rezoning R1 Single Family Residential District to A1 Agriculture District and Special Use Permit 121-99.c.34 Solar Farm, Section 27, St. Anne Township, FFP-IL Community Solar. ZBA case 18-29, rezoning A1 Agriculture District to RE Rural Estates District and variance to Section 121-149.d lot size, Section 15, Essex Township. ZBA case 18-30, special use permit 121-99.c.34 Solar Farm in the A1 Agriculture District, Section 30, Otto Township, Burr Creek Community Solar. ZBA case 18-31, special use permit section 121-99.c.34 Solar Farm in the A1 Agriculture District, Section 12, Norton Township, Granary Creek 1 Community Solar. ZBA case 18-33, special use permit section 121-99.c.34 Solar Farm in the A1 Agricultural District, Section 36, Rockville Township, McGee Solar. ZBA case 18-35, special use permit section 121-99.c.10 Community Residential Home in the A1 Agriculture District, Section 24, Momence Township. ZBA case 18-36, special use permit section 121-99.c.34 Solar Farm in the A1 Agricultural District, Section 01, Pilot Township, Irwin Solar. Declaration and disposal of surplus and unwanted equipment for the Kankakee County Management Information Systems Department. Adoption of the Kankakee County Policies and Procedures Manual. Appointment of Jim Byrne to the Kankakee County Board of Health. Reappointment of George Searles as Commissioner to the Kankakee County Public Building Commission. Reappointment of Alice Argellin to the Will Kankakee Regional Development Authority. Reappointment of Daniel Anker to the BM Lewis Drainage District. Reappointment of Larry Hammond to the Canavan Drainage District. Reappointment of William Olthoff to the X-Line Creek Drainage District. Reappointment of Naomi Endres to the Grinnell Special Drainage District. Reappointment of Daryl Ort to the Joe Benes Drainage District. Reappointment of Larry Dumontel to the Little Beaver Drainage District. Reappointment of Francis Smith to the Mantino Drainage District 3 Board. Reappointment of David D. Young to the Snake Creek Drainage District. Reappointment of James Wasser to the Snake Creek Drainage District. Reappointment of Neil Trudeau to the Union Drainage District Number 2 Board. Reappointment of Bruce Mathias to the Yellowhead and Washington Unit Drainage District Number 2. Declaration and disposal of surplus and unwanted vehicles for the Kankakee County Sheriff's Department.
Thank you. Does anybody want to hear that again? We have a motion and a second. That'll be a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Tripp. Aye. Mr. Washington. Aye. Mr. Legess. Aye. Mr. Stauffenberg. Aye. Mr. Vickery. Aye. Mr. Olthoff. Aye. Mr. Hess. Aye. Mrs. Pope. Mr. Mulcahy. Aye. Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Byrne.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand. Aye. Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Reinfeldt. Aye. Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mrs. Evans. Aye. Ms. Dunbar.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Zenz.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Under
Mrs. Parker. Sorry.
retribution will be swift. Under Highways and Buildings, authorizing the county board chairman. Oh, I apologize. Yeah, we pulled one. An ordinance amending the definition of hotel. I guess that is read into the record now. That is the title, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you want to make it official?
An ordinance amending the definition of hotel.
Thank you. All right, what was your question, Ms. Dunbar?
Do you want a motion and a second before you have discussion?
Yeah, let's do that. Motion, Mr. Byrne, Mr. Seroy, second. You're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for taking time.
it's okay.
I just, in the definition, it says rooming houses and apartment houses, and aren't those already regulated by rental laws? I just wasn't clear on how apartment houses become hotels.
Actually, Mr. Quinn might be better equipped to answer that. and I apologize for that, but,
No worries.
this was, the intent of this whole thing was so the CVB could capture hotel motel tax.
And
for-
Airbnb and
exactly,
that, and
that kind of stuff.
I understand the intent.
Yeah.
I'm just concerned that that'll increase regulation on apartments that are already being regulated in other ways.
Sure. So this is being amended because the state law around occupancy tax has changed. So all this is doing is mimicking that authorization from the state, as opposed to all the regulations for apartment houses and rooming houses and all that. Those would still apply. It's only for that tax component that this would amend it to. Does that answer your question?
It does not.
Doesn't. Go ahead and clarify for me then.
So are landlords then who own apartment houses going to be doubly taxed because they're also now classified as hotels?
Yes. Is your answer? Yes.
So if I own a multi-unit building that has long-term tenants, I'm going to be taxed as a hotel.
As long as it falls into the definition as it's written there, then yes, it would.
So the definition says apartment houses. So if I own a 2-flat in Kankakee and I'm already licensed with the city of Kankakee as a rental property, I'm also going to be taxed as a hotel. And part of my proceeds will go to the CVB under their hotel tax, under our intergovernmental agreement with the CVB. Is that correct?
That's the way I would say yes, yes.
Is that correct,
When,
Mr. Rowe?
I mean, I'm assuming there are some caveats to this, but
So the permanent resident caveat, right? So
Oh,
someone
absolutely.
that can occupy it beyond 30 days, that's not really a hotel motel
Absolutely.
situation.
But this definition specifically says apartment houses.
right,
Correct.
and that
But
definition
if
would
you
be
go down
kept-
a little bit further, there's the definition of like what a permanent resident would
Right.
be.
So even if a hotel is a standardized hotel for what we all understand it to be, if it's a permanent residence, this tax would not apply. So and the same thing would hold to apartment houses, rooming houses, hunting lodges, the whole definition.
Except that many apartment houses have month-to-month leases, which are only 30-day leases.
Correct.
That would be captured under this.
And it says for at least 30 days, so they would fall into a permanent resident.
So they would not be double taxed.
They're not going to be taxed as a
As
hotel.
long as they're under that, that they're over that 30-day threshold. Yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to parse that.
So this is the
So they can no longer do a week-to-week lease. They would have to do a month-to-month lease.
Correct.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
Correct.
I'm sorry. Peters? Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
sure.
Yeah, I see a lot of problems with that too.
Anyone else on that subject or any other with this? Mr. Snipes?
Is this, I mean, before discussion, we've already made the motion and seconded, correct?
Correct.
So that means the motion can be amended or allow me to amend the motion to, or make the suggestion that we could resubmit this back to committee to kind of iron out some of the details, because it appears to be there's going to be some reservations in passing it because of the language per se. So I would make that motion, whether it gets a second or not, but I would make that motion that we recommit it to committee just for further deliberations.
The, who made the original motions? Mr. Byrne and Mr. Seroy, so it's up to them to say they want to amend the motion or not, or move forward as presented.
Amend it. Amend it. Yeah.
Amend the motion to say, send it back to committee?
For further deliberation.
For further discussion.
Okay, so this vote is on the amendment to the, I'm sorry, hold on, let me get this straight here.
Yeah.
The motion is, actually, it's not on the amendment, they amend their own motions. This is to send it back. That's the vote right now, is to send it back.
So the motion is
Yeah.
to not approve it today, to send it back.
To send it back
Correct.
to executive.
For more clarification.
For more clarification. It's actually basically to send it back to the state's attorney's office to make sure that we're all on the same page. Yeah, because
And if
we have advisors.
Yes.
And if there's a concern about any of that, please reach out to our office before the meeting.
Right.
Because then we can make sure that this is resolved so we don't have to come back month after month for something we could have looked into yesterday. Sure.
It's always a challenge for me to get behind the microphone and answer things on the spot.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. So we can have that clarity when we come into the meeting.
And the concern, just so we're clear, is that we want to ensure that landlords of apartments are not do not fall under this tax.
Correct.
Okay, and
I'm sorry.
no, and then we'll have to define, right, do we want to do the 30 days? Does it want to be pursuant to a lease as opposed to a rental agreement? Okay.
Okay, so we have the motion and the second to send it back to executive pending clarity provided to the executive committee on what the options are.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes. Byrne and Zero, and they amended their motion.
Yeah, they amended their original.
So there's no second. Snipes doesn't have a motion.
Correct. Yes, Mr. Snipes doesn't have a motion.
For once.
Wow.
You gave a recommendation.
Just to clarify,
They
that
amended it.
number 3 microphone is still on.
Still getting what I want.
Yeah. No, I think clarity is what we all want. You're correct, you know, and so, Mr. Vicker, did you have a comment on that?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Wouldn't it be better just for us to vote no on it? Let's vote no. And then we'll, with a recommendation that we send it back.
They can just withdraw their motion, and if there's no motion, then
It does.
then it fails. That's the easier way. Just have Byrne and Zero withdraw their motion. There's no motion to pass it. Bring it up next meeting.
6 of one, half dozen of another, just so we're sending it back. Yeah, rescind the motion? Okay. So this does not go forward without any recommendation or motion? Is there a motion other than that? Second that a motion? Sorry. All right then, we'll take this back up again. It's not something that's pressing for the CVB. It's just something that they wanted to get on the agenda to make sure that we capture that revenue that has been missing. The next step is to get together and to figure out how to enforce it, because that's a big undertaking. You know, we don't have lists of all those locations around, so that's the next step. All right, moving on. Under highways and buildings, unless there's something else. Sorry.
Yeah.
Moving on, highways and buildings. Could I get a motion to approve and then a second? A motion, Ms. Parker, second. Mr. Olthoff, we could read that into the record and have a discussion.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, authorizing the County Board Chairman to sign an intergovernmental agreement with the Illinois Department of Transportation.
Alrighty. Is there any questions on this? It's basically straightforward stuff that we do every year at Highway. Just for, you know, there's money changing, so we have to put it out there for a separate vote. We have a motion and a second. Anything? Mr. Reinfeld. It's number 9.
No, I make a motion, we do this.
We already have the motion in a second.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington. Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess. Mrs. Polk. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Hildebrand. Mrs. Weber. Mr. Reinfeld. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Zenz. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving on, PZA. This ZBA case 1824. I would need a motion, and then we can get into discussion. Mr. Washington to approve. Mr. Vickery, the second. To send it to discussion. Alrighty. Mr. Dell's gonna get a little bit up here about this one on the screen. Yeah, so he'll read that into the record real quick, please, while he's getting ready.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, ZBA case 1824, rezoning I-2 General Industrial District to A1 Agriculture District and a special use permit 121-99.c.34 solar farm in the A1 Agriculture District, Section 07, Kankakee Township.
All right.
Okay, ready? Yep. All right, this is a request for a special use permit for a 2 megawatt community solar garden known as the Yankee Farm Solar on property located at the end of River Road on Route 45 south of Kankakee. You can see on the map on the screen the location. The solar farm would cover the majority of that parcel. Also is a request to rezone the property from I-2 General Industrial to A1 Agriculture. We only allow solar farms in our A1 Agricultural District. This property has been zoned industrial since 1967, when our first zoning ordinance and map went into effect. Zoning Board held a public hearing on this. We received a letter from the city of Kankakee asking that it be postponed till they could annex the property. To my knowledge, that has not even been attempted yet. Jolene Moss spoke at the zoning board hearing, but I believe she was speaking on the Irwin solar farm, since that's where she lives next door to, and had some claims about gallium arsenite and other hazardous materials in the panels. Tim Yonka, the property owner, stated the farm has been in existence for over 100 years and no one has contacted them concerning industrial or commercial development of the property. And David Crawford owns a billboard next door and stated that he has easements across the property. The developer said that they would work with them to avoid those easements. And zoning board voted 4-0 to recommend approval of both the special use permit and the rezoning, and placed conditions on the special use permit, which would be all ground cover established on the site shall be a type which is pollinator friendly to help support agriculture, and 2, all landscaping shall abide by any and all rules as outlined in the weed and grass control plan and is subject to the same penalties as the weed and grass control plan.
Okay. Now, this is an opportunity, Dale. We were talking about, within the mile and a half of the extra boundary jurisdiction, if you will, when you have a city and the county that have that planning area. And could you provide that clarity on where it requires a 3/4 majority vote, even though it really doesn't apply here because we don't have an official objection? I thought it would be good to inform the board of that.
Certainly. The special use permit does not, regardless of who objects, does not require any special voting. But the rezoning, if a municipality officially objects, and to do that, they must do it by resolution that has been filed with the county clerk, then that would force a 3/4 majority vote of the entire county board, not just those sitting here. Okay. That has not occurred on the site. Okay. So a normal vote would be appropriate.
Normal vote's appropriate. I just thought it was an opportunity. The other reason I asked them to pull it and vote on it separately, because as a Kankakee resident, I'll be voting no on this for specific reasons. But that, I'm not trying to influence anybody else's vote. I just want to register a no, because I think it goes against those criteria as far as the conditions that we must meet. So, but that's just my own opinion. I think it's zoned properly in this case, and I think that is a development corridor for the future of Kankakee. I don't agree with putting a solar farm there. So that's just my own opinion. Okay. So, any other questions, Mr. Washington?
Has the city been informed that they must put a formal objection in rather than a request?
They asked us to wait until they could annex it, I believe, Dell. Was that?
That is the letter I received, yes.
Yeah.
That's not a formal
no, it isn't.
Objection.
No, it isn't.
No, it's not a formal objection.
Could you inform them that they have to make a formal objection?
Well, I'm not sure it's my place to, but we could.
Yeah.
Well, who else would it be?
I mean, I'm not their advisor.
No, we're
their attorney.
What we're trying to do here is make a decision, an informed decision on all parties' part. And the city is a part to this because it's within their mile and a half.
Well, it was the zoning board's take that they could annex it at any time, so there was no reason to hold this up. They can still annex it even after today.
I still believe that it'll be a courtesy if we notify them.
Well, they were notified of the case. Frank Kaler appeared at the zoning board hearing.
That we notify them that they have to place a formal objection.
No, we have not. I have not.
I have not either.
And normally that's their legal advisor's job. But again, we can be good neighbors and tell them that. That's fine.
That's all I'm asking.
Yep. Ms. Peters first, and then Ms. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you think of any reason why, what would it affect to them that they would want to wait? until it's annexed in? They can annex it, you said, at any time, but is there a consideration of why they would want to do
Well,
that?
if it was annexed in the city, we would not be here talking about it. They would have the citing authority.
Ms. Dunbar first, then Mr. Legess.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Del, can you talk about what is on those other parcels around that parcel?
Sure.
Is it all zoned industrial?
Yes, to the south is zoned industrial. That is the old A.O. Smith plant on Route 45. To the north, you have a hotel. You have a mobile home park. The properties that's kind of cut out there along Route 45 are some homes that's also owned by the Yankee family. Same property owners. Across the street is Shapiro Development, and I think that corner is actually owned by KCC, where they have their entry sign. And there's a farm field with a farmhouse in the southeast corner there. That is zoned residential. Everything on the that's in the county on the west side of Route 45 is zoned industrial.
Mr. Legess?
I just want clarification. Did you say that if a village or a municipality passes a resolution opposed, it needs to be filed with the county clerk?
That is correct. That's what the state statute says.
And that's just on a zoning change.
Right. That does not apply to special use permits.
Okay, just zoning.
Just zoning, correct. Ms. Peters, second time, and then we'll go back to Mr. Fairfield.
Thank you. Just a clarification. So if we pass it here and then Kankakee annexes it in, can they then turn it down? Or are they locked in if we approve it?
I believe that would depend on where they're at in the construction process.
Okay.
If it's already existing, it would be a legal non-conforming use under the city's code. If it's still a vacant farm field, that's more of a legal question.
Mr. Fairfield?
Yeah, you said this has been industrial for 100 years and nobody's ever done anything with it. I can't see any reason why not to let them do whatever they want to do with it.
Okay. Any other comment? Mr. Vickery?
Does a comprehensive plan come into play here, Dell?
Well, certainly.
Do they have a
Certainly.
comprehensive plan?
Yes, the city does, and it's zoned industrial. Or, no, excuse me, it's planned for industrial.
Thank you.
Any other comments on that? Okay, I guess at this point, this does not need to be a roll call vote. This could be a voice vote, correct, Mr.? Yeah, I thought. Excuse me, we have a motion and a second to approve. This is a motion to approve. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Nay. Nay.
Roll call.
We have to do a roll call.
Mr. Tripp?
Aye.
Mr. Washington? Mr. Legess? Mr. Stauffenberg? Mr. Vickery?
Nay.
Mr. Olthoff? Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Mrs. Polk?
Nay.
Mr. Mulcahy?
Aye.
Mr. Snipes?
Nay.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Mr. Seroy?
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand?
Aye.
Mrs. Weber?
Nay.
Mr. Einfeld?
Nay.
Mrs. Peters?
Aye.
Mrs. Evans?
Aye.
Mrs. Parker?
Aye.
Ms. Dunbar?
Nay.
Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Fairfield? Mr. Zenz?
Nay.
Mr. Wheeler?
Nay.
Passes 12-11.
Motion passes 12-11. Alrighty. Moving on to ZBA 1834. Could we read that into the record, please?
ZBA case 1834, special use permit section 121-99.c.34, solar farm in the A1 Agriculture District, section 34, Manteno Township, Nostrin Solar.
Alrighty, if we could briefly explain.
Alrighty.
About this one.
This is another request for a special use permit for a 2 megawatt community solar garden. There is no rezoning with this one. It's located at the intersection of 2000 East Road and 6000 North Road, indicated by the red box on the screen up there. The entire property is the blue box. It's 100 and I don't have it. It's around 160 acres or so for the blue box. It's about 20 for the red. This went to the Zoning Board of Appeals. We received a letter from the Village of Manteno, Mayor Timothy Nugent, expressing the village's acceptance of the project and their support for the approval of the special use permit. They did note that they worked with the developer to push the entire project farther north to avoid the 6000 road in case it were to be extended across this property to the east. We had a representative, Catherine Wojcik, the village administrator from the village of Bradley, spoke against the project, stating that it did not follow their plans. Dave Legess, a Manteno Township trustee and drainage district commissioner, stated that the area was the headwaters for Soldier Creek and the main drainage outlet for the quarry passes through the property, which was, it's down in the lower left corner. You can almost see it on the map there. The developers, excuse me, did acknowledge that they knew about that and would work around it. And actually by pushing it farther north, I believe it avoids that drainage. And Luann Harville, township resident, stated the village of Manteno also supported the quarry and its limestone kiln, which covered the area in dust and killed trees. Zoning Board of Appeals voted 5-0 to recommend the approval with 3 conditions. And those, actually, the zoning board put 2 conditions on it and planning and zoning put 1. The the ground cover shall be planted with native pollinator friendly species. 2, all required landscaping shall be subject to the maintenance requirements and penalties prescribed in the weed and grass control plan. And 3, that the developer will landscape 6000 North Road if it were to be built. Okay.
Now, can I get a motion to approve first, and then we'll move forward into discussion? Mr. Vickery, second, Mr. Byrne. Is there any comments, questions about this?
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to comment on jurisdiction?
You know, that'd be good. Before this, yeah, that is relevant here.
All right. The Village of Manteno and the Village of Bradley have a boundary agreement that limits their planning and zoning areas to 6000 Road. Manteno has the north side, Bradley has the south side. So this
1.5 miles does not come into play.
No, that eliminates the 1.5 miles.
Okay.
Even though Bradley is the closer town, as you can see, that little turquoise area down at the bottom there is Bradley. It is on the other side of that planning boundary line.
So they previously agreed to that, so it doesn't.
They agreed to that, and in fact, the Village of Bradley's plans stop at 6000 Road.
Okay.
So they do not even plan for this property or anything farther north.
And so the committee knows I have an unofficial objection from Bradley beyond what was put on record. The mayor said that he would prefer that this doesn't go forward. Obviously, there's that border agreement, and Manteno approves it. So it's up to you to decide as the board what you think carries the most weight in this case. So, questions, Mr. Zenz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, you said that this property will be potentially pushed north. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
the south border will be pushed north?
They've moved the project boundaries north. It still lies within that red square.
Okay.
So they have not increased the area of the project, but the solar panels have been pushed farther north to allow for 6000 Road to be extended should we eventually extend it.
Is that identified in here? Because I didn't see that identified.
Yeah.
6-foot wide right of way for 6,000.
Okay, that's the Village of Manteno letter.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's identified in our finding of fact report as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Legess first.
I just, you kind of stated what I was going to state, but just for the record, the Village of Bradley does oppose this, even though the 1.5 miles does not come into play because of the border agreement. But we have that area designated for commercial, so the village, I want to go on record that the village does oppose this.
Okay, noted. Mr. Stauffenberg.
Thank you, Chairman. I think maybe you've answered this before. Why the whole 160 when they only want 20? Why rezone it all?
They're not rezoning. It's just a special use permit for that 20 acres down in the corner. It does not affect the rest of the farm.
Okay.
Ms.
I know there
Peters?
used to be some
It's
talk
on day
about
one
a road
agriculture.
going through there to Diversitech. You know, to make a loop around Diversitech to avoid the truck traffic.
That is correct. In fact, that's out of the Village of Mantino's comprehensive plan for the extension of 6,000 Road.
Yeah.
And we actually have plans at the county for that as well.
Okay.
Different configurations, but in that area where that property is, pretty much runs along that southern boundary line. And the developers have agreed to avoid that area and keep it open in case we need it.
Yes, Mr. Hess, and we'll go to Ms. Peters.
Thank you. This question's for Del. This is in the plan that we put up several years ago where that goes across and connects to 7,000 now.
That is correct. It actually goes all the way to I-65, I believe, in
Right.
Indiana, yes.
Right. That's when the construction of the old Woody Bridge, the new bridge on
Correct.
7,000.
The new interchange that will be opened probably the middle of next month is actually sort of phase one of that plan.
Thank you.
Excellent. Ms. Peters, did you have something? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering why Bradley, was against it.
Well, if you looked on the map,
You flip back, Del.
in our comprehensive plan, we have the aqua colored as commercial. And that's close to where commercial is gonna be.
The darker blue on the other side of the quarry is the Village of Mantino, by the way. Yeah, is it purple? Yeah. Colorblind, but over on the left side of the map, that darker blue purple area, that is the Village of Mantino's boundaries. The turquoise at the bottom is the Village of Bradley's boundaries. And the boundary agreement cuts across 6,000 Road.
Anyone else? Mr. Einfeld?
Delbert, are they gonna allow enough room on the south boundary of this portion, do you know, for full development of the 6,000 road to 4
I
lanes
believe
plus
66
this and
feet, which would be the side that
Their
that property
portion
would
of it?
give, yes.
Anyone? Ms. Weber?
I was just wondering on the comment about the dust covering the area and killing the trees. Isn't that affecting the panels also to have dust on them?
The developer says that that would not, and the kiln that they were referring to is no longer at the quarry.
Oh, well, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? So let's capture the roll call, please. Can do the nays. Do the
Mr.
nays
Tripp.
be.
Aye. Mr. Washington. Aye. Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess. Mrs. Polk. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Hildebrand. Mrs. Weber. Mr. Reinfeldt. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Zenz. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion passed.
Motion carries. Moving on to the next item, if you could read that into the record, please.
Resolution authorizing agreement and amendment of section 5311 grant agreement, agreement number 5006 19-0338-8995.
Can I get a motion to approve? Mr. Vickery, second. Mr. Byrne. Any questions about that? Just basic housekeeping, if you will, the grant agreement for the downstreet operating grant agreement. Alrighty. That'll have to be a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington. Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess. Mrs. Polk. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Hildebrand. Mrs. Weber. Mr. Reinfeldt. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Zenz. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Next item, can I get a motion to approve? Ms. Peters, second. Ms. Evans, you could read that into the record, please.
Resolution authorizing execution and amendment of public transportation capital assistance grant agreement under the Illinois Department of Transportation's General Authority fiscal year 2019.
Thank you. And again, basic housekeeping on our downstate grant, just to make sure that all that, keep the buses running, so to speak. Any questions, concerns? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington. Aye. Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg.
Aye.
Mr. Vickery.
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber. Mr. Reinfeldt. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Zenz. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving on to executive committee. And this is an ordinance allowing the establishment of home kitchen operations. First ask for a motion to approve. Mr. Byrne, a second. Mr. Washington, and discussion. Anyone? Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I brought before the executive this ordinance in July, and we're basically approving a law that's already on the books of the state of Illinois. And I respect all the sides on this. Like, obviously, it's a passionate issue, I guess. And really, it comes down to rural government. Are we the county board to tell people what they can and cannot do? We have constituents that may have someone that's doing a home-baked business already out of their house. Maybe they are home, they aren't able to get a job, but yet supplement income by making a couple $100 a month, help buy groceries. John mentioned local cases, but not one was a home-baked business. These are people that were showing up to a establishment and donating goods. They weren't a quote-unquote home-baked business. And again, it really comes down to rural government. I mean, are we going to be regulating who comes and cuts our lawn? If I choose to go use my neighbor to change my brakes, what's next? And I think it comes down to consumer choice. There are people that will not use a home-baked business. They'll use Nana's, they'll use Sweet Street. That's what their preference are, but it should be about the consumer's choice, not the Kankakee County Board's choice on what a person can and cannot do with their choice of services. Thank you.
Go with Mr. Vickery first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm gonna vote no on this, and I'm gonna vote no because I support local businesses already established, and I wanna support our health department's recommendation. Thank you.
Mr. Legess.
I voted yes in committee, and I'm gonna change my vote to a no vote today. I just think we're opening up a can of worms. This thing is wrought with problems. The $1,000 a month, or is it, or a year? Was it a month? $1,000 a month. There's no way to police that. They do not have to register with the Department of Revenue. It's mostly a cash business, so if you want to go over to 1,000, you can. If you want to go to 5,000, you can. You're going to start opening it up now. Brooke Love, I understand she has a background and she would probably do a good job. But you're going to open it up to people that have no idea about health concerns, about how to do anything. They'll just go into business now because we're going to allow it. I think it's a bad idea. And the people like Nana's Cakery stated, they've invested money. They've bought machines. They're trying to do it the right way. They're getting inspected. And now they have to compete with people that have no regulations whatsoever. You know, you can say you can do this and that, but you don't really have to, and there's no way that we can check on it. There's no way to capture any taxes, because it's gonna be mostly cash. And even if it isn't, who's gonna check on them? You know, there's no way. So I voted yes in committee because it sounded like a good idea, and I think this is one of the questions that I wanna bring up today is, when we have an ordinance, can we, by our own ordinances, I know it comes out of committee, and sometimes it doesn't come out of committee, and it's still voted on, but when it comes out of committee and comes to the full board, can we have a first reading? And I think this would have been one that would have been a great idea, because all of a sudden I was bombarded with calls with people saying, I didn't know about this, what's going on? If we could have a first reading and the following month have the second reading for adoption, I think it would clarify a lot of things, and people would be able to get the full brunt of what we're talking about. But in this particular case, I'm voting no.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Snipes?
I voted yes in committee, and I'll continue to vote yes now. The cupcake law is slightly different than the cottage law. Basically, it's economics. The cottage law allows you to make sell at the farmer's market. You make $36,000 a year maximum if you ever reach that point. The cupcake law is $1,000 a month and allows you to make $12,000 a year. What we don't consider here is that if the farmer market decides to sell the product after the farmer market ends in their homes, we have just closed the door, because this allows them now to sell the same product that they're selling at the farmer market in their house. I don't think people have kind of realized that. The cupcake law was actually created out of, what was it, Madison, Illinois, which hit the national headlines because the county came in and did just what we're doing right now, about to stop it, or have the potential to stop it. It is called the State Home Kitchen Operation Law. I didn't do it, the state did it. So apparently they thought that there was some need to address this particular issue, and thought, since the whole world's not going to do it at all 102 counties, those individuals who decide they want to follow a process versus it being illegally done in their homes. Because right now you just stop grandma who just sold some cookies for $1 or whatever, you just stopped her. No, can't do it for a profit. And then the other thing that we haven't looked at is that same cupcake law, it only says bread, cookies, cakes, and pastries, but it eliminates cheesecakes, custard pies, cream pies, and they're not allowed. So basically, there's a limitation to it as far as I'm concerned. America was built off of home-based business. I understand when people say I'm establishing a business, I followed the law. Kudos. But then how many businesses have been started at home that, if I followed the same process, would have been stopped? So I think we need to kind of look at this particular law. It allows the opportunity. This is just a bridge. The county is just the umbrella, but each municipality has to approve this as well. So they have another hurdle to basically challenge when they get through with the county adopting it. I don't think that it hurts an individual. We argue, well, there's really no food regulations except if something happens. But isn't that true with the restaurants? Isn't that true whether you cook at home and you make yourself sick? So the thing is that I think we sometimes we're just so gun-ho on stopping things. This is America, the land of opportunity, and I will not stop that opportunity.
All righty, Mr. Tripp.
Well, it's our responsibility to protect the public, and our Director of Health Department says we shouldn't do it. Crazy if we do.
Mr. Eifeld.
Just a brief line on this. I believe it's been done ever since we came here, United States. It's going to go on. It's just another regulation as far as I look at this. I think I'm gonna put yes on it.
Mr. Rolltop.
If the county votes no, can municipalities vote yes?
It's a good question.
No, the county has to authorize it for the municipalities to then pass it.
So if the county votes no, municipalities can't vote yes then?
Correct.
Okay.
If the end result of that was that the county doesn't pass it, the municipalities don't get the opportunity. It dies here. And unless it's home rule,
I have to check if city of Kankakee would be an exception.
yeah, that's the only exception I could think of. It's the city, but we can't say for sure.
They may be able to do it.
Mr. Hess, first.
Thank you, Chairman. I vote against this in committee, and I'm going to vote against it now with a recommendation from our director of the health department. He thinks it's going to be a problem. We have regulations already in there for food sales and fish fries and everything else. I think we ought to keep the regulations in there.
Okay. Mr. Seroy and then Mr. Washington. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In a couple weeks, St. Anne will celebrate a festival called the Pumpkin Fest. It's been going on for about 26 years. And with all due respect to Mr. Beavis, he's a good friend of mine, and I respect his opinion. But as he said, food prep can be very complicated. Early on in my early days, I used to go down at a Pumpkin Fest and be able to get a piece of pumpkin pie. I can't do that anymore. The ladies from the church can't make the pies and donate them to be sold. And so I think there's a little bit overboard between what we can and cannot do with this regulation to where it harms your small rural communities. Now, I understand those places in the back that have these bakeries are really good places, but people out in my area, they go down the street and buy it from the lady that makes the cakes. One lady quit making cakes because she was fearful that she would get caught breaking the law. And I don't want people that are baking cakes for a birthday and might make 25 cakes a year be fearful that they're breaking the law because they're law-abiding citizens. So I'm going to support this just to see where it goes. I also, there's a lot of vendors at the Pumpkin Fest. They're selling food that get regulated by the health department. Some I might buy from, some I might look at and go, no, I'm not eating there. That's my choice. So I don't want to put the choice, I don't want to be the person that makes the choice for people what they can consume and what they can't consume. So I'm going to support this.
Thank you. Mr. Washington.
As I said in committee, 50 years ago, my wedding cake was baked by a lady in her own home. We took it with us on our honeymoon. We had cake for everybody. No one suffered from it. And I don't see why we have to overregulate everything without allowing a chance for these things to be successful. As far as I know, these cakes have been baked. This kind of operations have gone on for more than the 50 years that I've been married. This doesn't make any sense to stop something that is already in progress, that is already functioning. I'm voting yes for it.
Thank you, Mr. Vickery, and then Mr. Reinfeld.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Beavis outlined one of the cases that happened here in Kankakee County. And I was affected by that because I had a very good friend and his wife who were victims of that food, that consumption in that restaurant. They were elderly, like I am today, and they never really recovered. that once they got down and in the hospital, they just never recovered. He was a golf partner of mine for many, many years, and I sorely miss that gentleman. Thank you. I'm not gonna support this.
We're going second time first with Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, to reiterate, it comes down to the role of government. Like Mr. Seroy says, who is it of us as a county board to tell someone what they cannot do? And you have regulated businesses. Ask the consumers at Chipotle how things went for them. And again, one of the quotes I love to hear is, "I'm from the government here to help you." And is it really our job to tell people what they can and cannot do?
Mr. Snipes, second time.
One of the things I want to say that both of those cases that the health department spoke of, Mr. Beavis, were health regulated organizations. So therefore, they speak of that outburst. When we asked, had there been any as far as these little home-baked mom pops, whatever it is, there was none. However, the other thing I would cause you upon is that if you start doing that, the reason that this thing blew up is because the health department shut down a preteen who was selling cupcakes. And so they felt that it was overreaching. And this law was made because the county overreached. The other thing that I will say is if we do this, then what about the lemonade stand? Is it coming next? Because something can break out there. So are we going to start limiting? I would entertain, and if by way of amended, if we were going to do it or consider it, I would entertain a health department plan to adopt the cupcake law. Put it in place so we can throw those regulations in there. But I see no reason to stop the cupcake law. Give me a plan, since we're so, if you're adamantly against it because of reasons, then give me an adequate plan so that we can adopt a cupcake law. I think that would be reasonable.
Thank you. Ms. Evans?
I'm certainly conflicted, I guess. I thought I had made my mind up, and then listening to others.
It's my fault.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. I am conflicted, I guess, by what my answer. I was originally going in one direction, I think initially, and then after hearing some other comments, I guess I would want it to be on record to say I am not really for this. However, I feel that each municipality should have the opportunity to make that decision, and for them to be able to do it. So for instance, if it came and I was on the Village of Bradley or any of those on their boards or on their on their boards, that I would pass it down. But at least I think they should have the say so, because we're not making the decision for the whole county. We're making the decision to, and I'm not also trying to pass the buck, but I believe that they should have the say so within their villages and their townships to make that decision.
Okay. Mr. Mulcahy first, and then Ms. Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I can't look at two pieces of pumpkin pie and say one looks good and one doesn't. You know, and for that reason, and with you know, I agree with what you're saying, Jim. If it was a lawn mowing business, nobody's going to get hurt with that. This has the potential to actually hurt somebody, and that's why I'm going with the health department's advice and voting yes. Voting no. Which way am I voting? No.
Mr. Fairfield?
All I got to say is that you tell me that these restaurants that are in the county, that there are people that are coming to work that aren't sick and working and preparing food. It happens every day, and people don't get sick from that I can tell, or that anybody's ever said. So I think I'm going to vote for it.
Any other comments? Mr. Lejess and then Mr. Reinfeld.
I'd just like to say that George's honeymoon must have been a doozy if he brought cake with him.
Thank you, Mike.
50-year-old cake.
But as I listen to all the arguments, now I know why that the state of Illinois didn't want anything to do with it. And that's why they passed it on down to us. But it says something about about it if only 8 counties out of 102 in 4 years have tackled it and said yes. So I'm gonna vote no. I think it's a bad idea, and it doesn't only affect cupcake operations. It could be other things, right? It doesn't have to be just cupcakes, is it?
It's those specific things. Oh, those specific things that are allowed.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean,
pastries, cupcakes, everything that's been baked.
And I think it's time that we listen to the health department. There's times where we haven't listened to department heads and it's backfired on us. So I believe we should listen to Mr. Beavis and the health department. Okay. Thank you.
I have 2 people, Mr. Tripp, first time, and then I'll come back to you. Well, there's a couple that haven't spoke. Ms. Parker first, and then Mr. Einfeld.
5.
Yeah.
I have a question, and maybe Dr. Murphy, if he's still here, can answer it. A lot of the schools do not allow baked goods. You know, if a child's having a birthday, you can't bring in homemade cupcakes or cookies. Is that regulated by the superintendent's office, or is that individual, Dr. Murphy? Is he still here?
The individual school, is that the school board for that district? Okay, is
So
the one
it's
who regulates.
individually.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Einfeld, you had a question or comment?
I kind of enjoyed Mr. Snipes's equal on a lemonade stand. However, like I said, it's $1,000, and if I don't believe we're going to get anybody to collect revenue on the $1,000 person that does it, this and that. It's very hard to police. However, if anybody's going to put out a marginal amount that's going to affect a tax range on this, they're not going to be doing something out of their home. They're going to want to grow a business, and they will be subject to all of the other regulations that the people that are now in business that are doing it large. So I think they've got enough restrictions on it to keep it small, keep it in the house. There are restaurants, as has already been said here, where people come in, and even though they are monitored and this and that, you've got people getting sick. I haven't heard anything of the cupcake size deal, small, in an outbreak. And I'm still, after listening to everybody, we've got a pretty wise health department and this and that, but I think here in the United States, we're starting to get overregulated on everything. I'm in business, and criminy, I got a county permit and a city permit and a village permit, and next thing you know, I'm going to have somebody on the same block write me a permit. I'm voting yes.
Mr. Olthoff?
Could I make a motion to cease debate and call the question?
There needs to be a second to that. And a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. All right, all those in favor of closing debate?
What?
Roll call.
Not for the debate, go ahead.
Okay.
Not for the debate.
Okay, all those in favor of closing debate? Aye. All those opposed? See, there's one in every crowd. Motion carries. Okay, now, we have a motion and a second to approve. Roll call vote.
Okay. Mr. Tripp?
Nay.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. LaJoss?
Nay.
Mr. Stauffenberg?
Nay.
Mr. Vickery?
Nay.
Mr. Olthoff?
Nay.
Mr. Hess?
Nay.
Mrs. Polk? Mr. Mulcahy?
Nay.
Mr. Snipes?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Mr. Seroy?
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand?
Aye.
Mrs. Weber?
Nay.
Mr. Einfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Peters?
Aye.
Mrs. Evans?
Aye.
Mrs. Parker?
Nay.
Ms. Dunbar?
Nay.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Nay.
Mr. Fairfield?
Aye.
Mr. Zenz?
Nay.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
It's a tie.
He's got it.
There you go, Nita.
Can't be, it has to be 12 to 11.
11, 12, motion fails.
Motion fails 11 to 12. And by the way, both pieces of pumpkin pie look good to me, just for the record. Both pieces of pumpkin pie look good to me, for the record. So. which is probably the understatement of the day. Alrighty, moving on. We have from Finance Committee. Mr. Olthoff, oh, you're on. Thank you, sir. We have the amendments to the combined annual budget and appropriation for Kankakee County, Illinois, 2017-2018 fiscal year. Motion to approve those amendments. Ms. Dunbar, second. Mr. Seroy, any questions about that? Okay, that's a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Lejes. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess. Mrs. Polk. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Hildebrand. Mrs. Weber. Mr. Reinfeldt. Ms. Reinfeldt. Okay. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Zenz. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Under other business, 7 openings on the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission. Wow, I thought we just filled all those. 2 openings on the Kankakee County Historical Preservation Commission, 1 opening on the Kankakee County ZBA, 1 on the Clawson Drainage District, 1 on the Gar Creek Drainage District, 2 openings, Mantino Drainage District number 3, 1 opening on the Mantino Drainage number 9, McGilvery Drainage District, Minnie Creek Drainage District, Moments and Yellowhead Drainage District, and Spring Creek Drainage Districts. All of those are 1 opening. 2 openings, Essex Township Fire Protection District, 1 opening on the Ethics Commission, and 6 openings, is that correct? Animal Welfare Advisory Committee?
That seems like a lot.
No, that can't be correct. There's not 6. There's only 3.
3, and then myself and Ms. Dunbar.
Yeah, it's not 6, so we'll fix that. Yeah, but yeah, there's 3 because we staggered the terms, 1 year and 2 year. So we should have 3 instead of 6. Any old business? Any new business? Ms. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand that there was a, pardon me, a recent decision at the Executive Committee to allow memorials to Governors Small, Shapiro, and Ryan on the courthouse lawn. That it does not appear on the agenda today.
Correct.
And I just had a couple of questions about that.
Sure.
So I understand that no county funds were used to create the memorials. They're
Correct.
private donations. Is the installation going to be done by the county employees?
No, we just direct where it goes and oversee, like, just call Julie and all of that stuff to make sure that it's
And what
up
about
to Building and Grounds wanted to see what the material was going to be, that it was going to match everything that was up there. Wouldn't be neon or whatever, just to make sure it could fit in.
And
with
thank
everything
you.
else.
And what about ongoing maintenance for those memorials?
Yeah,
Who's going
that's
to take
up-
care of that?
That's up to the county. All we do is mow that area, which we do anyway.
Okay. I'd just like to go on record that I think that should have come before the full board.
It should be noted that none of the other memorials ever went in front of the full board. I would like to make that mention. So, and agree, maybe it should, but no, the other ones never did. I was the first to bring it here. So, to the board at all. Any other? Besides?
No,
Mhm.
this is not adjourned. I have a question. Or a statement.
Trust is earned.
Uh,
Mr. Lejes.
I wanted to remind people, the treasurer has just told me that the tax sale of the surplus property, there's a public auction tonight at 6 o'clock at the Quality Inn.
Tonight, 6 o'clock, Quality Inn,
Yeah, and that's,
tax sale
yeah,
auction.
that's surplus property, tax surplus property.
Are they selling cupcakes there, Mike?
Uh,
We were.
No, but George has thawed his wedding cake. And,
Yep.
and one other thing, I understand that the memorials have never come before, the full board before, but, I think this is an exceptional case, and there's a lot of chatter out there. And, I kind of agree with Elizabeth. I wish the full board could have voted on it.
Okay.
Thank you. And I make a motion we adjourn.
He snuck it in on you. Second? Second? Okay, he's not doing it. Mr. Olthoff, you got in there. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Have a good day.